What's up, guys? This is Gino Cuddy coming at you at 1:30 a.m. on May 6th, 2020. It's a Wednesday. And I just have to talk about the films of Robert J. Horner. Oh my god, what a piece of shit. His films and the man himself. Oh my fucking lord, bro. I gotta talk about these films, man, because you truly haven't lived until you've seen films like 1934's The Border Menace and 1935's The Phantom Cowboy. Oh my god. I mean, let's just talk about the man himself for a minute here. Okay, Robert J. Horner. Okay, you go to his IMDb, you look at his story, and it really is a pissing match between him and UWF promoter Herb Abrams as to who the craziest motherfucking businessman in the world is. I gotta say, you know, I don't know who wins in that war. I really don't know who wins. Because, on the one hand, you have Herb Abrams, the UWF wrestling promoter from the 90s, and his fascination with Coke and everything that we learned from the Dark Side of the Ring from Vice TV about him. Oh, God. I mean, I love the man, but, God. Just listening to some of those stories, man, was just amazing. But, this Robert J. Horner, there should be a dark side of the camera. And do a whole episode on Horner. Because, oh my god, this motherfucker. You gotta hear the story of this guy, okay? Okay, so, I mean, I don't know how this motherfucker got into the film industry in the first place. I mean, that's something I'd love to know. He must have knew a guy who knew a guy who knew a guy who knew some rube with a fucking movie camera somewhere. That's how he must have gotten into fucking show business. Oh god. And the craziest thing is well, one of the craziest things about this mofo is dude was apparently born without legs. Like he was born an amputee. Like he had no legs. I mean, reports differ, as to if he was born this way without legs, or if he was involved in an accident in his youth, like if somebody like ran over his legs and shit. But apparently, dude had no legs from like the time he was a kid all the way up until the day he died in like the early 40s of like cirrhosis and shit. Um, and apparently he could only see out of one eye because for reasons, and he produced a lot of silent stuff, like around, the 20s and stuff. But I'm not concerning myself with any of that stuff, mostly because a lot of it doesn't survive and isn't readily accessible. So what I'm going to be mainly focusing on is his sound films. And oh my god, you truly have not lived until you've seen these films. I mean, there's really only three that you need to see in order to get a vibe for just the total bottom of the barrel shit that this motherfucker put out. And we need to get into his business practices. Apparently, everybody in Hollywood knew what type of dreck this piece of shit was churning out. And they were like, we do not want to give this motherfucker any of our money. So what he wound up doing was, get this, he would make his actors pay him to be in his films. So, like, fucking Bill Cody, for example, in A1 Films' The Border Menace. Yeah, he'd have to pay fucking uh, Horner to be in the film. In typical film, typically the way film works is that the actors get paid by, the studios and whatever, not the other way around. But hey, and you also have to realize, that this was like back in the days of the studio system and the film exchange system in America. So this was really the Wild West, no pun intended, the Wild West of Hollywood filmmaking. You had all these studios popping up everywhere, like especially around the time sound came in. You had, for every Paramount Pictures and Universal Studios, you had your PRCs, your Producers Releasing Corporation. You had your Tiffany Productions. You had your Sono Art Worldwides, your Monograms, your Republics, your Allied Pictures, your Grand Nationals. So and this was all on one stretch on fucking Gower Street in California, and it was colloquially known as Poverty Row. And there's a very good reason for that because and most of these studios, what they would do is simply just make westerns. Like the main reason for a lot of these studios was just to churn out westerns, and westerns, hell, they were the easiest fucking things to shoot. You just go outside, have put a guy on a horse, and have him gallop around for an hour and a half. That's all you had to do, really. And these films would be films that would be on like the second bill of like your double bill night at the movies. Or if you were in a rural area or a small town that didn't get, the bigger budgeted A pictures from a Paramount, this would be the main attraction. And there would actually be two of these types of films on the bill, because there was such a demand for film product back then. I almost compare it to how, in the home video boom of the 1980s, how there was just such a need for product that every, like, uh, putz with a film camera came out of the closet to film something, put it on a videotape, and ship it out to like Blockbuster and Family Video. This was almost like the same fucking thing. You had all these Poverty Row studios, and and I'll even say with this, for every producers releasing, for every monogram, then you had your really low scale Poverty Row outfits like your Puritan Pictures, your Reliables, your in the case of the example of these Horner productions, you had your A1 Films. That's AYWON Films, A1 Films, like the steak sauce, A1 Films. And these studios would produce like the ultimate bottom of the barrel shit. And they would like, and sadly, a lot of this stuff was where like a lot of silent film actors who couldn't make it in, bigger budget in Hollywood, this is where they would go. Like for example, 1935's The Phantom Cowboy, directed by Horner, had Ted Wells, who was a silent film cowboy, and he had retired, when once sound came in. But in 1935, Horner, got him out of retirement, and this was to be his comeback. They were actually planning on making like 8 more films, but this one was so poorly done that there was really no need for any other films, and Ted Wells didn't want to work anymore with Horner. Um, as a matter of fact, there was a only one other film that they did together, and that was I think 1935's "Defying the Law," which, as of this recording, is still considered a lost film. No copies have circulated of that, thank goodness. And as I stated before, the business practices of this Robert J. Horner. I mean, you want to talk about sleazeball businessmen and sleazeball film, producers and directors. This guy needs to be on the top of that list because he would, in addition to what I said earlier, having actors pay him to be in these films, he would also coerce, aspiring actors and especially aspiring actresses to donate money to invest in these films. And then he would wind up turning around and not even bother using them in those films. So essentially, he took these people's money and he ran. as far away as he could and made this schlock to put it into like your neighborhood theater for like a group of 10-year-olds in like 1931. Um, and the films that he made were just dreadful, especially the films with Jimmy Aubrey, who was a silent film comedian. I don't know how this dude ever got work. He was one of the worst actors I've ever seen on film. Um, and it's not because of a lack of acting. It's, if anything, it's overacting. If you've seen 1934's The Border Menace, or you've seen 1935's Phantom Cowboy, where he's practically playing the same character in both with the same character name, just changed around a little bit. Um, right away, right away, you could tell you're in for like, and especially the films with Aubrey. These films only clock in at about around 47 or 50 minutes because they were intended to be on the bottom bill of a traditional double bill screening at the time. This was back in the days when you could go to like a movie palace and see two movies, a cartoon, a newsreel, and you pretty much got a whole night's worth of entertainment at the movie theater and a nice air conditioned movie palace. We're not talking about your cineplexes. We're talking about a whole blown movie palace where they probably only had one screen, and they looked like opera houses. Um, and so they would have like these B features, but the thing with these Horner pieces of shit is that Jimmy Aubrey makes these films seem longer than they are because his acting is just so horrible. I mean, he is flailing his arms, he is yelling at the top of his lungs 99.999% of the time, and he is just unbearable and grating and jarring to watch. He is by far one of the worst comedians, and I use that term loosely when describing Jimmy Aubrey. He is one of the worst comedians I've ever seen on film. I swear to God, I defy anyone to find anyone worse than Jimmy Aubrey on film. I defy anyone to find a worse comedian from that era. I'm not talking about modern day. I defy anyone to find a comedian from around that era who was a worse comedian or worse actor than Jimmy Aubrey. He is insufferable in these films. Um, and you know, eh, again, I wonder how he got work. I really wonder how this dude got work. It's truly amazing. You know what it was? He was part of that same ensemble troupe that Chaplin and Stan Laurel were a part of, the Fred Carno traveling troupe over there in England. And people, movie agents or whatever, either this dude was a friend of Chaplin or in Laurel's, or the people, over there, in the movie studios, must have said, hey, Chaplin and Laurel worked out. Let's see if we can make this guy a star. Didn't work out the way they planned. He had his, I think, I was talking to my buddy Ralph Celentano, a film historian and film collector, and he said that he actually had his own series back in the silent era. And I find that truly fascinating because he is just awful, simply awful. I put him almost up there with El Brendel or Ben Blue, just you know, but amazingly, both of those I would rather sit through an El Brendel short, or I'd rather sit through a Ben Blue Taxi Boys short than sit through any more of Jimmy Aubrey. Honestly, I would. Um, and and there would be, these were mostly like for silent Western stars. These films, were again they were just westerns, and they were 1930s. The Apache Kids Escape, starring Jack Perrin, and that's actually a very interesting story in and of itself. Uh, Jack Perrin was a silent film cowboy, much like Ted Wells and all these other guys, and he He made a lot of films with Horner, and he and Horner never paid him. Horner never paid Jack Perrin for any of the work that he did with him. And Perrin regretted a lot of it later on in life. He regretted his association with Horner. I think everybody actually who worked with Horner regretted working with Horner, because he was just a total scumbag of a film producer. And nothing he ever made was really any good. As a matter of fact, The Apache Kid's Escape is probably the least worst of all the films that he produced, but even that's a pile of horse manure. Um, these films have very, very little to recommend, but something about them is oddly hypnotizing. You go in and you watch them, and you just can't wait until there's an awkward splice or an awkward edit, or there's stilted acting, or the actors fluff their lines. These are just like, these obviously are the products of a delusional madman when you sit and watch them. Um, uh, I mean, there is a reason. There's a very clear reason. I consider myself, I'm a burgeoning B Western aficionado, and there is a reason why there's so many B Western aficionados who declare 1934's The Border Menace to be the worst B Western ever made, if not the worst Western ever made. It is one of the biggest steaming piles of horse manure you would ever want to see in your life. I think it is a criminal injustice that films like Lon Chaney's London After Midnight, or nearly the entire early filmography of F.W. Murnau, is lost to time, but yet The Border Menace exists. The Apache Kids Escape exists. Um, the Phantom Cowboy exists. It truly is a cinematic crime that these pieces of shit exist when so many other greater films are lost to time. Um, I mean, again, they're only about 40 or 50 minutes each, but, they are so bad and so ghastly that it feels that much longer. You could be sitting there watching a 50-minute film directed by Robert Horner, and it could feel literally like you just watched Gone with the Wind. That's really how bad these are. I mean, for comparison's sake, there were a lot of other B westerns being made around the time that these were, and a lot of them were substantially better. In just acting, cinematography, everything in general, so much better. So these Robert Horner films are really dinosaurs when you look at them, and uh, I doubt that they played well even back then. I mean, I would have loved to have been a fly on a wall when those 10-year-olds and whatever, went into these, small rinky-dink, theaters, paid their quarter to get in, and sat and watched these things. I bet they walked out half an hour in. You know, these things are just the worst things you'd ever want to see. And Horner and his business tactics. I mean, he was arrested and convicted multiple times for racketeering, for failure to pay, and and he was a tax dodger. He was a total reptilian scumbag. But yeah, he kept making films and he kept dodging people. It's truly amazing when you read up the story of Robert J. Horner, and anybody who's listening to this, I insist you go and look up Robert J. Horner on IMDb, or even better yet, the Old Corral website. There's actually a website dedicated to B westerns, and it's the Old Corral. And just look up Robert Horner Old Corral. You should get it instantly, and you will just see, the total chaos behind these productions. I mean, I don't think I'm doing them justice, honestly. I mean, I've sat through all three of them. And the only reason why I sat through Apache Kids Escape is because it was a notable film. Because it was the first one of the first Poverty Row sound films. Full length, full blown sound films, not part talkie, part silent. This was a full blown sound film. And, there are moments in the film that almost feel like they there were parts of these films where I feel that the only reason why they were filmed was just to show off the sound equipment. Like there's a moment in the Apache Kids Escape where there's this character banging on a horseshoe for no reason, and it's obvious that it's there just to say, "Hey, see, this is a sound film. See, you can hear him clanging the horseshoe." Oh God. And these films are draining. They are draining. I mean, Phantom Cowboy. Let's talk about that one from '35, starring Ted Wells and Jimmy Aubrey. It is a piece of shit. I mean, as all these films are, respectively, but this one especially so because for like nearly the entire first reel, there's a character who steals Jimmy Aubrey and Ted Wells's clothing. So for the entire first reel, they're running around this countryside in nothing but their underwear. And considering the fact that these guys are well into their 50s, I'm sure that the women in the audience, when they were watching these films, must have fainted away from the ghastly sight of Jimmy Aubrey's potbelly. Um, and, I mean, one of the funniest scenes in that film is when they try to hitchhike. And oh my friggin' god! One of the funniest scenes in film history is when uh, uh, they're trying to hitchhike, and they say, and there's a woman coming by on a carriage, horse-drawn carriage, and she's all by herself, and they say, "Hey, can we get a ride to town?" And she's like, "Sure." And as soon as they walk out of the bushes, she gives like the best expression in the world. She's like, "Oh no," and just rides off. And then they wind up chasing after the carriage. It's like the most hysterical thing you'd ever want to see. Honest to God. But there is a very sleazy element to these films, and it's no wonder why a guy like Dwayne Esper was the recording engineer on Apache Kids Escape. And anybody who knows early 30s exploitation cinema knows Dwayne Esper from the work he did on 1934's Maniac. He made films like Marijuana from 1936, Sex Madness from 1938. These were all films that, were underground films made by Dwayne Esper to exploit sex, cannibalism, drug use, sex abuse, domestic violence, you name it. He filmed it. He threw it into a theater, and people went to go see it. There's this. I mean, people want to think, of the 1930s as, this fluffy time in film history where, you see Dorothy and Toto walking down the fucking yellow brick road. It wasn't all fluffy rainbows and clouds. I'm telling you that. There was a seedy underbelly to early '30s Hollywood that hasn't been fully discussed and looked into. Um, and these Horner films are among them. These were films that you would find playing late at night on television, and you would turn your head cockeyed, and you would be like, "What the hell am I watching?" In Border Menace, you see Bill Cody, wearing you watch the Border Menace, and you could clearly see where John Lasseter, the scum of the earth that he is, got the idea for Woody the Cowboy in Toy Story. You could clearly see the inspiration there because Bill Cody looks exactly the same. Um, so I think I've wasted my breath just talking about this shit. But please, if you're very much interested in viewing these films, they are all on YouTube for free. Don't be like me and go out there and spend money on these films. The only reason why I spent money on buying these films is because I want to say that I have them in my collection. I have Phantom Cowboy in my collection. I have Border Menace in my collection. I have Apache Kids Escape in my collection. I have the absolute bottom of the barrel worst in 1930s B westerns. There's nothing else I feel that can eclipse this, that can eclipse those three films and utter shite. There really is not. And Robert J. Horner, I think he is the sleaziest of all sleazy filmmakers from that time and probably even to this day. I mean, honestly, it's a contest between who's sleazier, him or Harvey Weinstein. I think they run neck and neck. If to be quite honest, and if you read his IMDb description carefully, Horner's, you could see that it says that he not only asked for a donation from his actresses, alluding to the fact that he probably asked them to give him a little handsy or a little BJ in return for a chance to be in his films, and then never following up on that. So yeah, total sleazeball. This Robert J. Horner. Apparently, he invented, the hover round. If you guys remember those dreadful hover round commercials, they used to play during The Price is Right all the time. Hover round takes me where I wanna go. Where will it send me? Yeah, this guy was an inventor of one of the early prototypes of that. Um, and I think it's quite fitting that that company wound up being shut down for being a fraud. Um, so there's that. Anyway, I'm running really, really long. I hadn't planned on talking about Robert J. Horner for this long and Poverty Row Westerns for this long. This is a continuing fascination and passion of mine, is watching, these Poverty Row odors, as we call them, OATERS, odors, as we call them. They really are fascinating. There's sometimes a lot of great action, a lot of great horse tricks and stuff, and they're just from a simpler time. And a lot of them, when you read the backstories and how they were made and everything, it's just so fascinating. I'm really glad that I've gone down this rabbit hole. Um, so anyway, yeah, this is Gino Cuddy. I've run for about 26 minutes now talking about Robert J. Horner and his piece of shit westerns. So yeah, if you want to go check them out, they're on YouTube. But don't come after me and blame me for and say that you wasted about 10 hours of your life watching movies that only clock in at 40 minutes each. Don't bother bringing your complaints to me. So yeah, it's about 1:57 p. Ugh, it's 1:57 a.m. on Wednesday, May 6th, 2020. I'm done. I can't go on any longer. This Robert J. Horner has totally drained me of my voice. I need to get to fucking bed. I need to sleep. Probably have nightmares about Border Menace in my tonight. Thank you so much, everybody. Um, so yeah. Enjoy your nights, enjoy your days, and avoid Robert J. Horner films like the plague unless you are criminally curious like I was. Peace.